Thomas Forrester, once the golden boy of Forrester Creations and heir to a fashion legacy, had always walked a delicate line between brilliance and obsession. But when he abruptly ended his engagement to Paris Buckingham, few expected the storm that would follow. The truth, when it came out, was explosive. Thomas didn't just call off the wedding because of cold feet or personal doubts exposed a chilling betrayal. Paris and her mother, Grace, had been playing a long game, orchestrating a quiet campaign to lock him into a marriage that served their ambitions more than any genuine affection. Paris had been leaking information about the Forresters to outside investors think catastrophic, just enough to sow confusion and make herself indispensable. Grace had pressed her daughter relentlessly, convinced this was their golden ticket into the elite world of the Forresters. But Thomas, ever the visionary yet haunted by his own manipulative past, pieced it together. A few overheard phone calls, a few coincidental meetings, and then one damning recording from a security feed in the Forrester guest house. He didn't make a scene. Not yet. Thomas simply ended it. Coldly, publicly, definitively. But ending things with Paris was only the beginning. Haunted by the realization that he had once again let obsession blind him this time to Paris's true intentions, Thomas turned all his energy into what he saw as a redemptive crusade. Reuniting his parents, Rich Forrester and Dr. Taylor Hayes. It wasn't just about love anymore. It was about fixing what he had broken years before. His past manipulations had driven Ridge and Taylor apart, pushed Brooke Logan back into the center of their father's life, and fractured the Forrester family. Thomas saw a chance at salvation, not just for himself but for everyone if he could just get his parents to the altar. He poured himself into it. Every dinner invitation, every family meeting, every subtle word planted with his fatherate was all carefully orchestrated. Steffi, his sister, was supportive but wary. She'd seen this side of Thomas before, charming, strategic, and dangerous when cornered. Still, the family dynamic had shifted. Rich seemed genuinely pulled back toward Taylor, drawn by the promise of peace, loyalty, and a life without Brooke's drama. And then came the day. The wedding. Taylor in white. Rich standing before her. Everything Thomas had fought for was finally in reach. Until Ridge hesitated. Until rigidity to form let his heart vacillate, his loyalty to Brooke plowed everything again. And just like that, it all crumbled. Taylor was left humiliated. The family was left stunned. But Thomas was broken. Something snapped. He had clawed his way back from the edge before therapy, redemption arcs, a long season of growth. But Ridge's rejection of Taylor was too much. In Thomas's eyes, Brooke had once again poisoned everything. She was the chaos, the reason his family couldn't heal. And if Ridge wouldn't see it, then Thomas would make the world see it. He became something else. Not the reformed son, not the hopeful fiancé, but a man possessed. The lawsuits started small. Questions about contracts Brooke had signed as co-owner of Forrester Creations. Disputes over design credits, marketing shares. Thomas brought in lawyers, forensic accountants. He cited clauses, found loopholes, demanded audits. Then came the public relations war. Anonymous tips to the press about Brooke's past scandals. Leaked emails suggesting improprieties in how she handled FC's charity partnerships. Whispers about favoritism, nepotism, and questionable financial decisions. Magazines picked it up. Fashion bloggers ran with it. Brooke's image along polished and marketably to hit after hit. Ridge, caught in the middle, pleaded for peace. But Thomas wasn't listening. Not anymore. This wasn't about business. It was personal, raw, and unrelenting. He framed every attack as a defense of Taylor, of Steffi, of the real Forrester legacy. Then Thomas went further. He pushed for a board vote to reevaluate ownership shares. He questioned Brooke's right to hold her stake in the company, citing her years of turmoil and scandal. He argued she was a liability. With a few well-timed stock purchases and an alliance with discontented board members, Thomas tipped the balance. The vote passed. Brooke's shares were frozen pending review. Ridge was furious, but his hands were tied. The board had spoken. And Taylor. She was horrified. She hadn't wanted this war. She didn't recognize the son who now weaponized everything in her name. But Thomas had gone too far to stop. He launched a new fashion line, purity, bold, minimalist, emotionally driven collection that subtly celebrated honesty, loyalty, and true family. The subtext was razor sharp. The marketing campaign referenced a new era, free from the noise of scandal. Sales surged. Investors rallied. And Thomas, he stood at the center of it all, radiant, fierce, and increasingly unhinged. Paris, scorned and still smarting from public humiliation, tried to strike back. She gave an interview suggesting Thomas was unstable, hinting at abusive behavior and obsessive tendencies. It backfired. Thomas sued for defamation and won. More than ever, Thomas was in control. But he was also alone. Taylor avoided him. Steffi begged him to stop. Hope Logan, with whom Thomas once shared a complicated and intense history, tried to reach out, reminding him of the man he used to be. But Thomas brushed them all off. In his mind, they were weak. They hadn't seen what he'd seen. They hadn't suffered the way he had. And then came the final blow. Thomas leaked documents to the press detailing Brooke's past affair with Bill Spencer years ago, long buried, long forgiven. But the timing was brutal. Bill was under federal investigation for unrelated securities fraud. The association triggered a media firestorm. SC's stock dropped. Sponsors pulled back. The entire company trembled under the weight of scandal. Ridge, furious and defeated, confronted his son. Their argument turned physical. For the first time, Ridge struck Thomas. Not out of anger but heartbreak. "You're not saving the family," Ridge said through tears. "You're destroying it." Thomas didn't respond. He just stood there, bleeding at the lip, eyes cold, breathing steady. Forrester Creations survived. It always does. But something had shifted forever. Thomas had set out to fix the past. Instead, he rewrote it with blood, ink, and lawsuits. The man who once dreamed of being a great designer, a worthy son, a husband, and a father had become something else, a force of reckoning, a storm wearing a suit. And while the dust eventually settled, one truth remained unshaken: thing would ever be the same again. Thomas Forrester thought he had control. He thought fear would silence Brooke Logan. He thought pressure would bend her. He was wrong. After Ridge's aborted wedding to Taylor, after weeks of manipulation and scandal, Thomas stepped out of the shadows. No more subtle sabotage. No more whispers behind closed doors. This time, it was open war. He confronted Brooke face-to-face on the Forrester Creations property in front of staff, board members, and even Hope. His words were cutting, his tone ruthless. He accused her of destroying his family, of dragging Ridge through decades of chaos, of poisoning the Forrester name with scandal after scandal. His final line chilled the room. "You've controlled my father for long enough. It ends now." But Brooke didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She didn't retreat. She left the office calmly, and within hours, her counterattack had begun. Brooke Logan had survived scandals, betrayals, and breakdowns, but she had learned from every one of them. This time, she wasn't going to play defense. This time, she fought back with law, leverage, and a media machine sharpened by years of experience. She filed an injunction against Thomas for workplace intimidation and defamation. She leaked emails and internal reports showing his reckless behavior within Forrester Creations, unchecked decisions, budget overspending on his purity line, and verbal complaints from junior staff. She hired a PR crisis team to push a new narrative. Brooke Logan, survivor, innovator, mother, and co-owner, fighting for transparency and corporate integrity. The tabloids, already buzzing with the fallout from Ridge and Taylor's failed wedding, exploded with the new headlines. Logan versus Forrester. The family civil war goes nuclear. Thomas Forrester unhinged. Brooke strikes back, and behind the scenes, Katie Logan was pulling the strings. Katie had always played the quiet one, the rational one. But this time, she was far behind the curtain. She coordinated the legal teams. She handled the press briefings. She crafted every statement Brooke gave with precision, turning Thomas's aggressive image into a public liability. Katie knew the stakes. She knew Brooke couldn't afford to lose just her place at Forrester, but her dignity, her power, her legacy. Katie also understood Thomas better than most. She anticipated his next steps, feeding Brooke's strategies before he could even act. She reminded Brooke that this wasn't about revenge, it was about survival. About reminding everyone, especially Ridge, that no one controls Brooke Logan. But while Brooke and Katie played their game in the spotlight, another player moved quietly in the shadows. Eric Forrester. Eric had watched everything unfold with growing unease. He was tired. Tired of the screaming, the lies, the manipulation. He loved his grandson, but he wasn't blind to Thomas's dissent. Eric had seen the coldness in his eyes, the obsession in his voice. And he knew this war had one source, Ridge. Ridge had let this happen. Ridge had refused to choose. Ridge had led Taylor to the altar and left her there. Eric didn't excuse Brooke's past, but he couldn't ignore Ridge's cowardice either. So Eric made a decision. No grand speeches. No big interventions. Just a few quiet conversations. A few scheduled lunches. And then one night, alone with Ridge on the patio of the Forrester estate, Eric poured him a scotch and said, "It's time you tell Taylor the truth. All of it. You owe her that much." Ridge resisted. He dodged. He blamed Thomas. He blamed Brooke. But Eric stood firm. "This started with you. It ends with you." Meanwhile, Thomas was losing his grip. His attacks on Brooke were backfiring. Sponsors were pulling away from the purity line, fearing brand damage. Internally, the Forrester board was beginning to question his leadership. Hope distanced herself, unwilling to support him after witnessing the confrontation with her mother. Even Steffi, who had once championed Thomas's redemption, began pushing back, warning him that he was burning every bridge in the family. And then, the final blow. Brooke filed a motion to review the Forrester ownership agreement, claiming Thomas's behavior constituted a breach of fiduciary duty. She wasn't just fighting him anymore. She was threatening his place in the company, in the family. But Thomas didn't retreat. He doubled down. He called a press conference, unapproved, in the main Forrester studio. Cameras rolling, reporters waiting, he stood before the world and painted himself as the victim. "I have fought to protect my family, to protect my father. I will not be silenced by lies and manipulation." He accused Brooke of exploiting her relationships for power. He hinted at legal bias, at personal vendettas. It was raw. It was desperate. And it was the end. Because as the cameras cut, Ridge walked into the room. Silent. Watching. And then, publicly, on live television, Ridge stepped up to the microphone and said, "Thomas, stop." He turned to the cameras. "I love my son, but I can't support what he's become." Then he turned back to Thomas and added, "You say you're protecting this family, but you're tearing it apart. And I won't be part of it anymore." The fallout was immediate. The board suspended Thomas from executive duties. His designs were pulled from the next show. Brooke's legal team withdrew the injunction, but the damage to Thomas's reputation was done. Katie arranged exclusive interviews for Brooke, painting her as a survivor of corporate bullying, a woman who refused to be silenced. Taylor, watching it all from afar, finally confronted Ridge. He told her everything. About his doubts. About the wedding. About his inability to choose. Taylor, heartbroken but dignified, simply said, "I deserved the truth, not a fantasy," and she walked away. Thomas, isolated and furious, retreated to the beach house. No phone calls. No statements. No appearances. Just silence. Eric resumed his role as patriarch, stabilizing the company. Steffi took over creative direction, working closely with Hope to relaunch the new inclusive line. Brooke, having proven her strength, quietly withdrew her legal motion and focused on rebuilding the public trust in Forrester Creations. But the scars remained. The family was fractured. Trust was thin. And Thomas, once again, had burned everything he touched. What began as a quest to reunite his parents had turned into a corporate war zone. A clash of egos, legacies, and wounded pride. And in the end, no one walked away clean. Brooke had stood her ground. Katie had played the strategist. Eric had pushed for truth. And Regents again had learned to late that indecision has a price. In the world of the bold and the beautiful, power is never given. It's taken. And once taken, it must be defended at any cost, even when the battlefield is your own family.
Oh.